All right, we're going to be in Jonah tonight, chapter uno. That's one. For those of you that are like taking German or some other ridiculous language in high school that you're never going to use again, but you're like me and you're like, man, German sounds way easier, and you went to your parents and your parents punched you in the face and said, no German for you. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about tonight. There's just a side rant. I guess I'm still bitter. Life goes on. But hey, we are going to be in a series called Uncomfortable for the next 3 weeks. And we're going to be talking about Jonah, okay? And so some of you, right, like you think about Jonah, and maybe you've got like this like VeggieTales flashback. Maybe there used to be this band. I guess you could call them a band. I never know what to call like contemporary Christian music groups. But there used to be this band, girl, boy band music group they were called FFH, which stood for Far From Home, because their home was in heaven. And they sang a weird song about someone being in the belly of a fish. And that's what I always think about, because that's what my mother listened to in the car all the time. And God bless her, I have way better music taste than her. So maybe you think, oh, no, you don't. You listen to screamo music. We get it, Braden. We get it. We get it. We get it. No, see, my bands are on the other side of puberty. It's a different world, Elijah. But so maybe you think about those things. Maybe that's what you think when you hear Jonah and you think about those things. But here's what's crazy. We'll talk about in a little bit. The number one thing that we think about Jonah is only like a few verses of 4 chapters, okay? Jonah is not a very big book in general. It's literally 2 pages. And when I say 2, like it's the back of one and the front of another in my Bible. And so there's not a lot there, but there is something there. And very little of it has to do with a fish/whale, whatever preference you have. Okay, and tonight, like every night in the loft, when we look into the book of Jonah, man, we want to find out a couple things. And those 2 things are this: who is God and how does he deal with his people? Who is God and how does he deal with his people? And tonight we're going to see, man, who is God? How does he deal with Jonah? And so one of the like weirdest things about my world and my job is one, and you guys don't do this as much. This is like a middle school students kind of do this a lot, right? They come up to me and they're like, hey, so like, what's your real job? And I'm like, this professional dodgeball player. Like, this is it. Like, this is, unless you're Truman. Truman did one time come up and ask me like, so what do you like really do? Truman Ross, where are you at? You're hiding now. Okay, there you go. Usually you have a giant like UT hat on and I can find you, but then there was nothing there. It was really hard. Right, and we've got this moment, and it's like, well, what do you really do? And this is it, largely. Like, I'm a youth minister. My job is literally to hang out with you, to love you, to plan, like, ridiculous events, like, citywide for you, and to torture my volunteers in the process, and it's incredible. I love you, volunteers. You're great. But within that, like, one of my main tasks that is kind of seen is that I get to teach and preach on a weekly basis. I am, for, like, lack of a better word, a professional communicator. Now, that doesn't mean anything. That just means that someone was crazy enough to let me do that for a living. And what's interesting about that is I've only taken 2 public speaking classes in the entirety of my existence, and one of them was when I was a senior in high school at Georgetown High School, and then the other one was at Texas A&M when I was a senior there. It's good to be in the presence of all 3 of you. And so we would, Carson, never again. And so one of the things, though, when I took this class my senior in high school, I had to take it. I didn't want to take it. I had no desire of, like, doing public communication or anything like that. I was like, I hate being in front of people. I'm not really a fan of most of the people I go to school with. My biggest nightmare is standing in front of them and giving speeches. Like, I still, at 25, like, have those nightmares where I wake up in a cold sweat and I'm like, why did I go to school in my underwear? Right? Like that's my fear. Like, that, it's just eyes in general is really, really weird to me. And so when I go and I take this class, I go into it, and I'm just like, pass it, get out. Pass it, get out. And then I had, like, all my friends at a table, which was like, just don't get attention. Just don't get attention, right? Like some of you sit by that friend in class, and all of a sudden you become, like, a little criminal. It was, like, tearing down the walls. Or like, it's insane, right? And so we get into this class, and we take this class, And I get to the end of it, and like the major thing that we have to do is give a persuasive speech, okay? And this persuasive speech, right? I've got to persuade the rest of my class to believe something, to think something, to do something. And I was born in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I grew up largely an Arkansas Razorback fan, and so that's where I thought I was going to go to school, even in my first semester of my senior year. And so I get up, and I'm like, my persuasive speech, to go to the University of Arkansas. I'm going to convince all my friends it's really easy because it's cheaper to go there than any of the other state schools, and you don't have to be very smart. Like, this is it. Let's do this. And so I get ready, and I rip my thing off the stand because I'm shaking like it's 30 degrees in the room, which is kind of normal because I'm really skinny and I get cold really easily, but still like a little bit like, do you need to go see a doctor? And I get through that, and I get a C in my class, and I think it's just because my teacher took pity on me and was like, I never want to see you again. Pass, move on. Right, and then later on, I get to college. Throughout that time, something crazy happened that we'll talk about in a little bit, but I had kind of preached maybe, somewhere around 20 to 30 times, and I was like, oh man, like I got the flow of this, right? I was like this cocky college kid, because every college kid ever is cocky. You take like one class in a lecture hall, and you're like, I think I understand electricity down to its finest point, and you're like, you can't even spell electricity, bro. And so we sit in there, and I'm like ready to go, and I had like 3.5 people total ever tell me that like, hey, like you're kind of like good at communicating. Like, this is kind of your thing. And so I'm like, all right, this is great. I'm the next like mega church pastor. This is gonna be phenomenal. And I sit in my hall of about 20 of us, and we have to do about 3 different speeches that semester, and I just get railed every single speech. And my professor is like, let me tell you the 27 reasons that you're terrible and your parents made a mistake. And I'm like, oh, goodness, lady. You're in the right profession. This is, and I get through, and I get a C in that class, right? And I tell that, and some of you are like, well, yeah, duh, because you're awful, and I hate sitting in front of you every week, right? And some of you are really sweet, and you're like, it's okay, Lane. You're doing okay. And when I say some of you, I mean like Carson, right? Like she's like, you're doing great. Right, but it's just like this weird thing in my life that like my lowest grades ever have come in the thing that I actually do for my life. Like, that's what I do. Like, this is my job. And so I go, man, how did we even get there? How did we even get to even those sermons before I ever went to class? How do I get from getting a C as a senior in high school to deciding that's what I'm going to do for a living? How do we like jump that hurdle of fear? And so this interesting thing happens almost as soon as I get a C in that class. I went to a large youth ministry, and about the size of ours, and a lot of my friends were there, and we had kind of like, hey, we want to do something cool. We want to plan the next series, right? Just like our series, Uncomfortable. And we went to our youth pastor, like, we want to plan the next series. We want to do the games. We want to do the songs. We want to do all the stuff. We're going to tell you what you're going to teach and all this stuff. And we went to him, and we were like, you're the professional. You can preach for the next 3 weeks. And he came to us, and he was like, I would love a 3-week vacation. Why don't you guys preach for the next 3 weeks? And we were like, we don't think you know Jesus. Like, why would you do that to us? Like, why would you do such a thing? And we're sitting in a room of our friends, and a couple guys kind of raise their hand like boldly. They're like, yeah, I think I can swing this teaching thing. How hard is it, right? Like, they're the ones who look at youth pastors like, what do you do all day? You just go up there and make up some stuff while you read the Bible. There's no sweat. And then I sit there, and I've got a friend, and you maybe have friends like this. Like, you love them, but they're kind of your rival, right? Like, you're frenemies, right? Like, you're like, we'll hang out. But when I hang out with girls, I tell them how awful you are, right? Like that was kind of our friendship. And he's kind of sitting in the room, and y'all are like, surely nobody does that. All of y'all do that. I know y'all. Come on now. And he's sitting in the room, and he starts to like kind of raise his hand, like, maybe I'll use this opportunity. And I look across the room, and I just stare him in the eye, and I'm just like. And so they're like, okay, there's 3. We're taking Scott, we're taking Matt, and we're taking Lane, and they're going to preach. And then like as soon as I put my hand up, like the voice in the back of my head is like, no! And I'm like sitting there, and there's 3 moments that your heart rate goes really, really fast. And remember, like I ran track and cross country all through high school, but there's only 3 moments that it beats a little bit faster than that. And one of those is when you're about to ask someone on a date, right? And it's just like, and you're like a dude, and you're just sweating in your hands. You didn't even know that you sweat here. You're like, where's the glands? You're like, you can't figure it out. When you go up to this girl, and you're beating really fast. Right? The other one is when you're really, really sick, and you're about to vomit. Sometimes that's also when you're asking somebody out on a date. And then the third is when you're about to do something that is completely outside of your comfort zone, and you are terrified, and the sirens and the bells and the whistles are going off in your head, and they're like, stay away, abort, run. And you're just like, voice. calm down, I got this. And voice is like, you're gonna die. In this moment, I'm like, man, I think that I want to do this thing. I'm not very good at it, but I think that I want to do this thing. And it came from this something inside of me, right? Like let's for kicks and goes, let's call it God. And there's something inside of me that says, hey, I'm about to do something with your life. And I had felt that something a little bit along. See, I wanted to coach all through high school. I wanted to coach track and cross country. And there's not like a lot of guys that grow up want to do that. Like people are like, I want to coach basketball, I want to coach football. And then there's like all these skinny little nerdy kids that are like, I want to coach the weirdos. And that was kind of me. And so I was like, man, I'm going to coach. I want to coach track and cross country. And that was kind of what I always thought that I was going to do. But then there would be like these tiny shimmering moments where I'd have this thought and I'd be like, maybe I want to do youth ministry. And then another voice was like, no, you don't. You're going to be poor forever. And I was like, okay, good job, voice. I'll go coach high school. Ooh, man, that's exhilarating. I mean, look at those things. And all these moments kind of come up to this moment, and I raise my hand. I'm like, I think I'm going to do this thing. See, what's interesting is that we want to be as comfortable as possible at all costs. We don't want to do the things that make us uncomfortable. We don't want to do the things that are going to cause our heart to beat really, 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 really fast. Enter every dating app ever. Right? Like, you're right, you don't want to do that. Swipe left. We'll create that. It'll be great. Surely no flaw will ever come into being in this. Right? I mean, that's why so much of what we do is like, man, pursue comfortability, right? Like some of you are like my wife, and you've got like a pillow that you're like an intimate relationship with. Like you're like, this is my pillow. I take it everywhere. I love this pillow more than I love you. Like this is the pillow. You think I'm joking? That is like borderline a conversation that we've had before. She's like, don't touch the pillow, right? Like we go travel and we're like walking out the door, like all the lights in the house could be on, like a fridge door could be open, and she'd take like one step out the door and be like, oh, I forgot my pillow. And I'd be like, there are people dying in our building. Like the house could be on fire. The dog is in the background like, arr, arr, arr. She's like, pillow. Right, like, because she loves being comfortable. Right? And we love, right? We have comfort zones, right? We have people even that we're comfortable with. We have people that we hang out with and we're like, okay, this is when I can be me. And they get a different version of me than everybody else because this is where I'm comfortable. Right? If you play sports, right? Maybe you play basketball. You've got like a square foot on the court that you're like, if I shoot from right there every time, like 90% of the time it's going in. Unfortunately, there's always a defender there. And you're just like, that's my sweet spot, right? Like we have these sweet spots where we live. We have this comfort. But then we have these really weird moments where we step outside of what makes us comfortable, and then something crazy happens. And so again, man, babe, you're a lot of sermon illustrations tonight. I apologize. We should have talked about that earlier. I still love you. Again, like when we're in college, this crazy thing happens. Haley I am kind of an extrovert. Like I enjoy like being crazy and all stuff, but like as soon as I go home tonight, I'm gonna take a coma till like 10 a.m. tomorrow because I'm just gonna be wiped. But like Haley doesn't like fake it. Like she is who she is, and she loves close, intimate relationships. Like she loves being really close, but she's not gonna like run up on the stage and scream and make herself look stupid. Thank God. There can't be two of us like that in the house. Like there just can't. But there's this one moment in college that every time she tells this story, I think is just freaking hilarious because she begins to talk about this girl who's a really good friend of hers. Her name's Amanda, and she tells me the story of how they met, and I'm like, you almost died. Like that's how the serial killers get you, right? And so she tells this story, and she's like, yeah, so like me and Amanda, we both had these boyfriends who went to the University of Texas, which red flag number one. That's how we knew they didn't love Jesus. And they met, oh, so that's where I want to go. Anyway, so these two boyfriends are like guys they moderately like they're kind of interested in. They go to UT, and then my wife and her friend, they're at A&M, and so these two guys are like, oh man, our girlfriends, like they should kind of like meet each other. And so they're like, yeah, okay. And so all of a sudden, each of them get the other person's cell phone number and just like trust, which is stupid, they're texting another freshman girl in college. I'm like, that could have been a 40-year-old man. Like, you could have got a 7 instead of a 1. And oh my goodness, like everything would have been awful. And they begin to text. And then one day, because they're like, let's have like a picnic lunch in the middle of Texas A&M's campus. It'll be beautiful. It'll be so great. And they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, let's have a picnic. It'll be awesome. And then so they go and they set up a picnic thing, which like dude, we don't picnic, like unless there's a girl involved. Like we don't like later on be like, hey bro, you want to go have like some soup on a blanket? It'll be great. We'll get to know each other. It'll be cool. We'll sit in silence for 30 minutes. It won't be weird at all. And so she goes and she's like texting. She's like, I'm the one wearing the purple shorts. And like, you know how many people are probably wearing purple shorts on any given day on a campus that has 60,000 people on it? I'm going to venture like 10,000. So somehow, maybe it might not have even been the girl you were texting. We don't know. And they go and they have a picnic together, and they, like, in one lunch date, begin the best of friendships. And now Amanda is someone who is regular in our life. Like, she was in our wedding, and she is a missionary across the world, and so they kind of talk back and forth a little bit, and like all this really cool stuff came out of it. But it's like the number one thing that's totally outside of Haley's comfort zone. She's like, yeah, I'm just gonna go meet a stranger. Like, what of it? And I'm like, you don't even want to meet me. Like, we're married, okay? Like, it just blows my mind. But this really awesome things happens outside of our comfort zone, and we kind of know that too, right? Like, we might have these moments, these stories where we made a friend that we're like, how did we end up meeting? Like, you're crazy. You might be one of the serial killers. I don't know. But somehow we met, and now we're friends, and we shouldn't have, because we're different. And there's this huge tension that we really, really desire comfort, but progress and moving forward and great and incredible things happen the moment we step outside of our comfort zone. And so what we have to deal with is this friction of maybe God didn't create us to be comfortable. Right? And I get that, right? Some of us are built for comfort, some of us are built for speed. I get it. That one's sit for a little bit. I'll sit for a little bit. Okay, well, let's sit now. Thanks, Morgan. You're the best. Right, but maybe largely, God is not concerned with us being comfortable, but we think he is, right? Because here's how a lot of my conversations play out, right? Citywide's coming up, and we'll tell a kid, hey, come to Citywide. There's going to be speedboats and tubing and kayaking and Nerf force and bubble soccer, and they'll be like, yeah, but, who's going to be there? And I'm like, the boats are going to be there. That's all, boat number 1 and boat number 2, the only friends you need. And they're like, yeah, but who? And I'm like, the boats. Right? Because they want to be comfortable. And then they're going to miss out on this experience. And then they're going to be the ones coming back later I really wish I would have gone to Citywide. And I'm like, yeah, boat 1 and boat 2, they missed you. Here's a letter. It says, go to Citywide next time, you idiot. And but we love comfort. We love being around these people, but maybe God didn't create us that way. But sometimes we think that he did. We'll have this conversation. Oh man, you should go on this thing. And we're like, oh yeah, I just don't know if that one's for me. My people aren't really going on that trip. Or this, and that. And all you're communicating is that the pinnacle of following Jesus is comfort, which is, for lack of a better word, I don't know, insane. It doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense because of what Jonah says in chapter 1, or what God says and what Jonah does. Here's what we know about Jonah. Jonah's a prophet. If you don't know what a prophet is, prophets have the worst job in all of history. Okay, because prophets have to go tell people what God says. And largely, prophets are the ones who walk into the room and they're like, you done messed up. Fire's coming. And then, the next, pan to the next cut. And it's just there's the end of your city. Right? That's kind of prophet's role, right? If you know the story of David and King David, when he does a lot of things namely adultery and murder. It's a prophet that is to come into the king's room and be like, let me tell you a story about some sheep, David. And David's like, let's kill them all. And they're like, oh, David, you're the sheep stealer. Right? That's the prophet's job. And so Jonah, as a prophet, he has to speak on behalf of God. But here's the thing about Jonah. We don't really get any great characteristics about the dude. Like David is a murderer and adulterer, but we still get but David was a man after God's own heart. Like David has these redeeming qualities. He's got some major failings, but he's also loves the Lord. Like with Jonah, we just get 4 chapters on how miserably he screws up. That's the narrative that we get, and this is legitimately how it starts. This is a rough first 4 verses for the guy. It says, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because their evil has come up before me. Now, catch this, right? Like that's a rough hand that Jonah gets dealt, right? They're like, hey, go to the evil land and tell the evil people that it's not going to go well for them, and let's just see how that pans out for you. Right? Like Jonah at this moment in time is like, that doesn't sound so fun. Got the next card, draw another one. And so this is what Jonah does. Jonah got up to flee Tarshish from the Lord's presence. He went down to Joppa. He found a ship going to Tarshish. He paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the Lord's presence. Funny thing about the Lord, his presence is everywhere. Ah, darn it. Right? Jonah does this crazy thing. God says, go to these people, right? Like there's probably not another time in history that God speaks more clear than he does to the prophets. He says, go here, do this thing on behalf of me. And Jonah so boldly looks at God and goes, I'm going to ghost you, right? Like, he just pieces out. No explanation, just goes and buys a boat ticket, and he gets on that boat and he goes to Tarshish. And if you don't know this about Tarshish, here's the deal. Tarshish is like thousands of miles away from Nineveh. Right? Like he doesn't just I'm just going to go to a neighboring city or I'm just going to stay right here. Like he goes, oh, Tarshish, that's fun. I'm going to go all the way over there to the other side of the known world. Right? Like if you're going to run from God, Jonah runs the furthest, right? Like if you've ever run from God, or maybe you came in tonight and you're running from God, don't worry, your bro Jonah has run a lot further, literally, physically. Like he is trying to separate himself as far as he can from where God has called him to. Man, God so specifically says, hey, go to Nineveh. It's one of the most evil places. The book of Nahum speaks of Nineveh and says that there's sorcery, says that there's a lot of sexual immorality, says that there's murder, says that there's blood in the streets, right? Those aren't if someone was like, hey, I drove through Marble Falls or something, they'd be like, yeah, did you see the blood in the streets, right? Like that is a terrible way to describe a city. And it's not just a small town. The Bible says that it's a 3 days journey, okay? Even the slowest of slows can make it across Marble Falls in a few hours. This is 3 days journey. This is a huge city full of immorality, full of evil, really the enemies of Jonah's people, of Jonah's God. That's why God tells him to go speak out against it. And here's the deal. God doesn't tell Jonah to do this because he hates Jonah. God tells Jonah to do this because he wants Jonah to get uncomfortable. He wants Jonah to get uncomfortable. But Jonah loves being comfortable more than he loves God. And let me tell you this. I so much often love being comfortable way more than I love God. Because comfort is easy. And the moment God calls us to be uncomfortable, it is frustratingly difficult. But God doesn't do it because he's mad at Jonah, because he's angry at Jonah. Here's actually what we see. We fast forward to chapter 4, and we see this moment on the back end. Jonah eventually, gets eaten by the big fish, and he ends up in Nineveh, and he speaks out against them barely. It's a really half-hearted attempt, and then Jonah sits back and waits and hopes that God is just going to burn Nineveh at the ground, and he doesn't. And Jonah, in his frustration, says this: Jonah was greatly displeased. That's a word. And became furious. That's probably a better one. And so he prayed to the Lord, right? That'll preach on its own. When you're greatly furious, go to the Lord. And he says, please, Lord, this isn't what I thought while I was still in my own country. That's why I fled to Tarshish in the first place. I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God. We go, man, why did Jonah run? See, sometimes we run because we're scared when things get uncomfortable. We're scared of what God might do. We're scared of what he might call us out of. Jonah's not scared of what's going to happen in Nineveh. No, Jonah knows what's going to happen in Nineveh because Jonah knows his God, and he knows that his God is compassionate. Here's why Jonah runs, because Jonah thinks so much of himself, that he is such a good person, that he is a prophet, he is a man of God, and then he looks at the people of Nineveh and he goes, not those bad kids. And he so hates them that he would rather them burn than meet his compassionate God. Because he knows that God, even when he looks on the deepest and the darkest of sin, that at any point you can turn from that sin and follow him. Jonah's not afraid of what's going to happen to him. He's afraid of what God is going to do with those people, that he's going to have compassion on them. And Jonah doesn't have a lick of compassion for them. Here's what we know. God doesn't call us to be uncomfortable to mess with us. He doesn't call us to be uncomfortable to do something great with us. No, God calls us to be uncomfortable, to be compassionate. When God wants to get us uncomfortable, he wants to be compassionate towards someone, and he's invited us along in that journey. I mean, when God calls me to get uncomfortable every week and to speak, man, the hope is that he will show compassion on teenagers. When God calls you to be uncomfortable, maybe he's even just trying to show compassion on you because he's trying to call you out of a situation. He's trying to call you out of some sin. He's trying to call you to himself. He wants to show compassion. It's always what getting uncomfortable is for, that we could enjoy the compassionate and gracious God that Jonah knows. Man, this school year, we came out of the gate. You know, we didn't have like a sweet little Jesus loves you sermon. Instead, we have a how are you going to get uncomfortable this school year? How is comfort getting in the way of what God is calling you to do? How many times have you said, well, I just don't want to do that. It's just not, I'm not very comfortable with it. Maybe God wants to do something really cool, right? And like, yes, there's gifting. Yes, there's skill set, right? Like there's a reason I don't play guitar on Wednesday nights and George does. That's because we'd all be uncomfortable, okay? There are those things, but sometimes it's just our fear that keeps us from doing something great. How are you going to get uncomfortable this school year? For some of you, you don't know who God is, you don't know who Jesus is, but let me tell you this. Jesus knows that comfort is the enemy. Jesus, God in the flesh, when he comes down, we ask the question, who is God and how does he deal with his people? When we read about Jesus, that's who we see. Jesus is God in the flesh, and what he does and how he interacts with people is how he deals with them. And then there's this moment where God has to go to be the sacrifice for all sin, to bring people back into relationship with himself, that the compassionate and gracious God would call sinful people like you and me and like Nineveh back to himself, that the only way that to happen is for there to be a sacrifice. And Jesus goes to be that sacrifice. Let me tell you what's not comfortable: crucifixion. Jesus so doesn't want to get uncomfortable. He's sweating and bleeding in the garden, begging God, like, please don't let this be it. Why? Because he knows it's going to be awful. But when Jesus gets uncomfortable, you and I get compassion. And if we are going to be Christians, if we are supposed to follow Jesus, if we are going to give our lives to Jesus, we have to get uncomfortable too so others can get compassion. To be image bearers of Christ. Man, and if some of you, you've never given your life to Jesus to follow him, it feels uncomfortable to go to an adult and be like, hey, sitting and pretending is like the worst thing you can do. Pretending to know God is the worst pretending of all time. And so for you, man, maybe you get uncomfortable tonight because you go to your small group minister and you say, hey, I want to give my life to Jesus for the first time. Some of you, maybe you gave your life to Jesus at VBS, you got saved, you said a prayer, man, but you've never like followed through in baptism and gone public with your faith, because standing in front of your friends and saying, hey, I believe this, and yeah, I'm still messy, and yeah, God's still cleaning me up, and yeah, I'm still frustrating, but I believe this, and I believe that God is saving me and restoring me, and he has saved me and he has restored me, and in this moment, I want to come to you publicly and do that. Man, maybe that's how you got to get uncomfortable, is to follow in obedience in baptism. Maybe some of you, maybe you just got to like walk across the room. Like you just got to meet someone new in your high school. And maybe you got to meet someone new that you really don't like. The next 2 weeks, we're going to talk about why is this calling to Nineveh so uncomfortable? Because God calls them to uncomfortable people and uncomfortable places. Some of y'all got to break out of your little clique. Right? Groups of friends are good. You're going to always have them. I've got my friends. You've got yours. Maybe you're my friend. I don't know. But you got to break out of that and get to know some people. You've got to get to know the kids that no one else wants to know. Maybe it's time for you to leave your lunch table and go sit at another lunch table and meet somebody, because you might be the only thing close to Jesus that they meet. And it's going to be super uncomfortable to you, and you're going to sweat in your palms where you didn't know that you could sweat. But God can do cool things and show compassion to your high school in that. Man. And I struggle with this too. We'll close with a story, and then we'll dismiss you to your small groups. I want you to know this. Man, I'm not always good at being uncomfortably obedient. A couple weeks ago, I went to a show of a band that I love, right? The screaming and the gnashing of teeth, yeah. I love a little mosh pit action. I come back with bruises, and my wife's like, I don't feel bad for you. I'm like, I didn't ask for your pity. It was awesome. And I went with one of my best friends from high school that I love. Man, I love him. I love his wife. I love his kid. And when we were little, we used to go to church together, but then some craziness in his life just kind of tore him away from the Lord. And him and his wife, man, they don't know the Lord. They don't follow the Lord. Their family doesn't know the Lord. And he begins to just share with me how frustrated he is just with life. He's like, man, I love my wife, but I'm bored in marriage. They've been married for like 3 years. Now, they've been dating since they were 12. He's like, man, I love my wife, but I'm bored. And he's like, and I hate going home. I would stay at work all day if my kid wasn't at home. And just sharing brokenness after brokenness, and I'm like physically ill. Like I feel like I need to like call my wife immediately and be like, baby, I love you. I am so sorry if I did not tell you that today. And it's frustrating, and I can just feel this awkward, uncomfortable feeling the entire time, because like every part of me wants to go like, dude, what happened? Like, I used to be the screwed up one. Like, I used to be the one coming to you and being like, all my relationships are broken. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know who the Lord is. How did that change? Where did you miss it? Like, why don't you follow Jesus anymore? And I got to tell you, I got through the entire conversation. We get through the entire night. We watch the entire show. I go home, and the next day, and I tell my wife about this entire conversation. And I never once was like, dude, do you know Jesus? And that's like my job. Here's what I know. That God is going to tear me up every time I talk to that guy, most likely. And that's going to be awful. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to make friendship like really awkward. But I know that until I get uncomfortable, like he's never going to know the compassion of God, because his only knowledge of church and of Jesus is hateful people. And that sucks. Here's what I want you to understand. Man, it is difficult for me to get uncomfortable too, but here's what I know. Marble Falls, the Highland Lakes area, will not know a compassionate Jesus until high school students get uncomfortable for the sake of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so tonight, as I dismiss you, the band's not going to come up and play. You're going to go to your small groups, and you're going to talk about what does it mean to be uncomfortable? What does it mean to maybe go outside of my comfort zone to talk to people? What does it mean for that to happen in my life? And maybe afterwards you pull your small group leader aside and you say, hey, here's what I think it means for me to be uncomfortable. I want to follow Jesus for the first time. I want to go forward and publicly profess my faith through baptism for the first time. I don't know what it is, because I'm not you, but what I do know is that God does not give a rip about your comfort. He cares about his kingdom, and his kingdom advances when we get uncomfortable. I'm going to pray for us, and then you guys can go to your small groups. If you don't know where you're going, ask a friend. There will be some adults out there, and they'll take you to your rooms. Father, we thank you for tonight. God, I pray that you would make us get uncomfortable all school year, that you would push, that you would press on our hearts, that you would change the hearts of man, that you would change our minds, that we would see people differently, that we would see you differently. God, that you would make us uncomfortable, because the kingdom progresses, the kingdom moves forward when we get uncomfortable. Father,